African countries are rising and getting more powerful, and the Western countries that had them under their heel for so long, like the UK where I live, are on the way down and their economies are collapsing. What help do you think we're going to get from those countries that are becoming more powerful? How do you think that the Africans are going to look towards the English with regards to trade deals and buying their uranium off them if we need to? They're not going to look too kindly, are they? Especially if there's absolutely no apologies whatsoever. And as far as I can tell, this country doesn't apologise for jack shit. And the reason it doesn't apologise is because if it apologised for the stuff that it's done, it'd have to start giving back all of the stuff that it's stolen. I've spent hours inside the British Museum. That place is an absolute, it's a treasure trove. It's incredible. And it's nearly all nicked.
The British government has, like you've said, previously acknowledged and expressed deep regrets over what happened. Deep regret is not an apology.
No, so we choose the language carefully. We expressed deep regret. We said it in Parliament.
The most violent country in the world in the 19th century, by far, was perhaps the most democratic or second most democratic, and that was Britain. You can be democratic at home and ruthlessly imperial abroad. The most violent country in the world since 1950 has been the United States. It's been by far involved
Jeffrey,
in more,
stop
wait a
now.
minute, in more
Let's
wars.
Jeffrey, I'm your moderator, and it's enough.
Okay, I'm done.
Grand rising kings and queens from Africa and across the ocean, welcome back to my YouTube commentary. Now, we have talked a lot about black people rising, Africa rising, and it's affecting white nations. Yeah, it is. I've done a number of videos and we will not stop until we see the rising. So we have a lot of time to talk about this, the rising and falling of the empires. But I came across this white man, I think from UK, and he was admitting the mistakes that UK has done to Africa. And he admitted that they need Africa. They need Africa. Yes, they need Africa to survive because they don't have resources. They are a tiny island. And I think it's awakening. White nations are waking up from this dream, from this lie they were told that they were this superior. But even their own kids, even their own citizens are now starting to see the system lied to us. Okay? Because for centuries, Britain looked down on Africa. They treated Africa as a child that needed guidance. That is reality. Okay? They treated Africa as a continent that has no future without them. They treated Africa as a place to exploit raw materials, cheap labor, and cultural theft. They build schools that erased the history of Africans. They build churches that erased and demonized African spirituality. They build governments and install governments that divided black people, that divided Africans. They thought Africa will never rise again. But now, as we are speaking, their own people are saying the truth. Their own people are seeing Africa is rising. Their own people are seeing their Britain is failing. It's falling apart. Africa is standing. They are seeing that. And let me tell you, the empire is trembling. And for the first time in the generations, even European countries, even France, America, Portuguese, Germany, they are realizing that tables are turning. Yes, tables are turning. And let me tell you one thing. This is not just about apology. No. Not just about coming, ask apology, and then you continue. No. This is more. This is about the truth being forced into the space. Because when the oppressed rise, the oppressor has no choice but to confess. But as I always say, don't be fooled, because many white people confess with their mouth, not because they are sorry, but because they are afraid. They're afraid of losing. They're afraid of losing the power. They're afraid of losing wealth. They're afraid of losing control. And that's why most of them apologize. So don't fall for the baits. Don't fall for talks. We need actions. So when a white man from UK says Britain must apologize to Africa, we must not talk just about words. And that white man is very serious, I think. He's admitting that the survival of his country is on black people, is on Africa. Now, let's watch this clip here and then we continue.
When this collapse comes, and it's going to come, we in the UK are going to need to have some serious reflection. on mistakes that have been made, and especially our foreign policy in history. And we're going to have to rely on these nations that we've been stealing from for years to deal with us, because we need them. We're not like Russia. We're not self-sufficient. Russia has its own oil, its own food, it doesn't have to import anything. It can survive without the world. We, a tiny little island, do not have that luxury. We need to import. That's why we've stolen so much history. So what happens, do you think, in the next decade as African countries are rising and getting more powerful, and the Western countries that had them under their heel for so long, like the UK where I live, are on the way down and their economies are collapsing? What help do you think we're going to get from those countries that are becoming more powerful? How do you think that the Africans are going to look towards the English with regards to trade deals and buying their uranium off them if we need to? They're not going to look too kindly, are they? Especially if there's absolutely no apologies whatsoever. And as far as I can tell, this country doesn't apologise for jack shit. And the reason it doesn't apologise is because if it apologised for the stuff that it's done, it'd have to start giving back all of the stuff that it's stolen. I've spent hours inside the British Museum. That place is it's a treasure trove. It's incredible. And it's nearly all nicked. And we're going to have to, in the UK, in the West, really start looking at our place in the world and really start looking as to whether we really do value the things that we say we do. I saw somebody earlier saying, this is what the West do. They just play pretend. It's no wonder the West now accept a man being a woman if he just identifies as one, because we in the UK have been identifying as a nation that is on the side of law and order, a nation that values free speech as it's censoring everybody, a nation that values freedom of the press and is a shining light and a beacon for freedom of the press throughout the world, whilst it's literally the best journalist the world has ever seen in its capital. We say we are these things. Our government says them all the time. The diplomats are like that. But it's just all hot air. Nothing we do as a country backs up what these people are saying the country is. Nothing. I love my country, and that's what I want my country to turn into, to be. I think it's the most patriotic thing a person can do.
The British government has, like you've said, previously acknowledged and expressed deep regrets over what happened. Deep regret is not an apology.
No, so we choose the language carefully. We express deep regret. We said it in Parliament, so we said it in the most public way. We've engaged very closely with the Mau Mau veterans who were affected, and we not only paid compensation individually, but also we helped arrange for the monument, which now sits in Uhuru Park. So we've been very open about those difficult bits of our history.
Why fall short of making an apology?
So we haven't made an apology really in any context. It's an extremely difficult thing to do. So what we think we want to do is we want to acknowledge the difficult bits of history. We want to talk about them openly, both to the countries which were affected, but also, as I say, to the individuals and communities.
What's difficult about making an apology?
So an apology starts to take you into difficult legal territory. And so, as I say, the settlement that we made was an out-of-court settlement. So it showed our sincerity and our desire and our openness about recognising that abuses had been committed. But that was the route that we chose and was accepted by the Mau Mau Veterans Association.
Okay. So during the visit here, their Majesties will From the statement that was made by the High Commission, they'll acknowledge the more painful aspects of the UK and Kenya shared history, including the emergency period, 1952 to 1960. His Majesty will take time during the visit to deepen his understanding of the wrongs suffered in this period by the people of Kenya. Together, their Majesties will tour the new museum dedicated to Kenya's history and lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown warrior at Uhuru Gardens, as well as visit the site of the declaration of Kenya's independence in 1963. The words here, to deepen his understanding of the wrongs suffered in this period. What does that mean?
So firstly, he will go to the museum, and that's where Kenya tells its own history about what happened in that period, and he'll see how it's told, but also he'll meet Kenyans who are learning about their history, school children. So he'll understand both what happened, but also how it's taught to Kenyans and how Kenyans perceive it today. The symbolism of him going to the place where the Kenyan flag was raised for the first time, and his father was present at that very important ceremony, again shows us sort of engaging very clearly and positively with that history, and there may be opportunities as well for him to meet people who can talk about how their communities were affected, or how their families were affected, or how they themselves were personally affected during the British period. And as I say, His Majesty has a very deep and sincere desire to understand these things better.
And then what? Then what after understanding? So he is going to have a deep understanding of what happened. What do you expect him to do after that?
So part of this goes back to what we were talking to CT about. So he's not the head of state. He doesn't make policy. I think he will talk about this openly, and we hope the fact that him talking about these issues openly will, for those communities and for normal Kenyans, will be an important symbolic moment. But then it's a decision for the British government to say, as we engage with a particular community or a particular group and we hear what their requests are, whether there is something that we can do to help. In many cases, their requests are actually more for the Kenyan government than they are for the British government, but we'll see if there are things that we can do.
When Britain claimed Kenya in the early 1900s, they didn't just rule it, they took it. The most fertile farmland in the country was renamed the White Highlands. And this wasn't just a name, this was law. Africans, especially the Kikuyu, who had lived there for centuries, were forced off their own soil. And entire communities were moved to subpar reserves. And if that wasn't bad enough, Britain instituted taxes on the Africans that they could only pay by working for the settlers. Hut tax, poll tax, labour tax, all of these were forcing people into wage slavery. Movement as well was tightly controlled. Africans needed passes to leave their reserves, and wages, they were set incredibly low so that people were poor and dependent on the work. This wasn't about civilization, it was about creating a permanent class of cheap labour for Britain's plantations and railways. By the 1940s, people had had enough, and political groups like the Kikuyu Central Association started demanding land and rights. And out of that frustration, the Mau Mau Rebellion kicked off in 1952, with fighters swearing secret oaths to reclaim their country. And how did Britain respond? With overwhelming violence. Entire villages were wiped out, and communities rounded up and put into barbed wire camps. And inside those camps, torture was routine. Beatings, sexual assaults, and starvation. And people were hanged after sham trials. The British official count stands at 11,000 Mau Mau people killed, but Kenyan survivors put that number higher, far higher, with a lot of civilians being caught in the crossfire. For decades, Britain denied all of this. In school books, they spoke of loyal Africans and terrorists, and the camps were airbrushed out of history. It wasn't until survivors sued the British government in 2000 that all of this information came out. In 2013, the UK government admitted what had happened and paid compensation. But even then, they called it an isolated incident and not the brutal system that it truly...
I hope you are doing great. Okay? For those who have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do so. And for those who are sending super thanks and appreciating me, oh my God, I don't have words to appreciate you, because you are doing a lot in my life. You are giving me life. You are giving voice to speak. Okay? Now, let's begin with the Britain wealth. Let's begin with what is so-called greatness. Britain was never built on hard work and moral views or values. it wasn't built on that. Britain was built on the suffering of black people. We all know that. It was built on the backs of enslaved Africans. It was built on stolen land. It was built on stolen resources and stolen futures. Okay? Are we good up to there? So when the British Empire began to expand in the 16th and 17th centuries, they had one mission from Africa. Take from Africa, demonize them. Okay? Participate fully in the transatlantic slave trade, fully. That was their mission. Ships left British ports like Liverpool, Bristol, and London filled with guns, filled with alcohol and cheap goods. They sailed to Africa. When they exchanged those goods for human beings, our ancestors, millions of Africans were kidnapped, were chained and sold. Their lives were reduced to profit margins. It is so sad. Whenever I learn about this history of my ancestors, somehow I get emotional because those ships that had our ancestors sailed to Caribbean and the Americans. And then our people were forced to work on plantation, producing sugar, cotton, and tobacco. The raw wealth was shipped back to Britain, feeding their revolution, their industrial revolution. Now, let's understand this for those who haven't read more about the history. I know I have viewers who are Gen Z. We are still learning. Let's understand this. Without African slavery, there will be no Great Britain. There will be no industrial revolution. There will be no British Empire. Okay? The slave trade's only the first chapter. And once Britain had made enough money selling human beings, they turned their eye to the continent itself. They started with humans and then they wanted to take our soil. So the 19th century was the era of the scramble of Africa. And in 1884, in 1885, European powers gathered in Berlin. And they gathered without even a single African at the table. And they carved up our motherland like slice of bread. They kept out our motherland like a loaf of bread. Britain took vast territories like Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, Uganda, Zambia, Zimbabwe, South Africa, and more. They came with guns and flags. And they told us that they were bringing civilization. But let me say this. What they really brought in Africa was not civilization. They brought theft, they brought violence and exploitation. Africans were pushed off their ancestral lands and British settlers took over. They farmed the cash crops in Kenya, here in Kenya. It's called the White Highlands. Gold mines, diamond, oil, and countless minerals were ripped out of the soil and shipped to London. Till today, the Bank of England gold vaults contain wealth extracted from African mines. Africans were taxed in European currency money, and we didn't even use. They were forcing Africans to work on British plantations and railways just to survive. Britain deliberately divided tribes, regions, and religions, setting up conflicts that still plague Africa up to today. I don't know if you hear me. They erased our culture. Schools and churches taught Africans to despise their languages, their traditions, and their spirituality. And they told us our ancestors were savages. Now, here's the painful truth. While Britain was extracting trillions from Africa, they were investing almost nothing back. Railways and roads were built not for Africans, but to move resources to mines or to ports. Okay? And that's why you see this part we have roads, good roads, and railways, but this part, there's no. It's because white systems, the Britain build railways, build roads, not because of the people, but because they wanted to transport what they were transporting from one point to the port to another. So this railway or this road could only benefit here on this area alone. Schools were rare, healthcare was almost non-existent. Africans were deliberately, we just remained dependent to them. Let's not forget the violence. When Africans resisted colonization, Britain responded with brutality. In my country, Kenya, during the Mau Mau, uprising in the 1950s, thousands of Kikuyu men and women were tortured, beaten, and killed in detention camps. In Zimbabwe, African freedom fighters were hunted like animals. In South Africa, Britain supported apartheid policies for decades. Don't let anyone tell you colonization was long time ago. No. Britain crimes are even recent. Many African countries only gained independence lately, 1960s. Zimbabwe became independent in 1980, South Africa in 1944 after the apartheid, just 30 years ago. So even after independence, Britain didn't let go our countries. They created a neo-colonial system, economic chains that kept Africa tied to Europe Former colonies were pressured to trade only with Britain, to keep using British companies, to keep their wealth flowing onwards or outwards. They assassinated and overthrew African leaders who resisted, who were strong, who were here to help, and installed their puppets. So when this white man from the UK admits that Britain made a mistake, I feel like I must correct him. That was not mistake. That was deliberate crimes, systematic theft, organized oppression, and generational destruction. Okay? Britain owes its very existence to Africa, and yet Britain has never properly apologized. They give lectures about democracy, but they never admit they denied it to Africans. They speak about human rights, but they never alone for the millions of black bodies thrown into the Atlantic. They never talk about that. They celebrate their royal family, but that very, very monarchy is dripping with African blood and jewels stolen from our land. Now, and I learned about it. The Colonial diamond in the Britain crown jewels came from India. The gold that decorates Buckingham Palace, much of it comes from Africa. Even the museums are filled with stolen African artifacts, from Benin bronzes of Nigeria to scattered Ethiopian treasures looted during the war. So Britain never created greatness. They stole greatness. And I will say this, history has a way of cringing back. History has a way of coming back. The same empire that once thought it was invisible, it is now trembling. The same empire that once divided Africa is now dividing within itself. And the same empire that once believed Africa will never rise are now watching Africa rising higher and higher, and they have nothing to do. And that's why this white man spoke. He knows British crimes cannot be hidden forever. He knows that the empire cannot stand forever. He knows Africa is no longer silent. He knows. Not only this man, the system knows. The empire knows. They know, okay? But I will say an apology is not enough, because I think you cannot apologize your way out of theft. You cannot apologize your way out of centuries of exploitation. That's why reparation come through. Yeah? When this man says UK must apologize, we must hear it with caution. Okay? Now, it's a good that the truth is being spoken. Okay? But family, Africa must not be satisfied with words. The same Britain that apologized today may be planning new ways to exploit us tomorrow. That's all I always say. So we don't just be satisfied with words that, okay, they have said now they are good. No. That's why we must stay vigilant. The history of Britain in Africa is not a story of mistake. Okay? It is not a mistake. It is a story of calculated expression. And if it is this history that explains why Britain is collapsing today and why Africa is rising. Because we have been saying, when you build an empire on top of lies, when you build an empire on soaked blood, hiding truth, erasing history, changing narrative, of course one day the truth will catch up with you. And when the truth catch up with you, you are over, because the truth will always prevail where it's supposed to be. Let me say this. Britain had a long-term damage to Africa, okay? First, economic damage, because British robbed Africa its wealth. And in doing so, it crippled our ability to build strong economies. It damaged our ability as Africans to build our wealth, you know? Our leaders inherited nations rich in resources, but poor in infrastructure, poor in industries, and poor in investments. We had the land, but Britain had the banks, okay? We had the minerals, but Britain controlled the markets. And that imbalance still defines our economy up to today. Even worse, British created cash crop economies, forcing countries to rely on one or two exports. Ghana became dependent on cocoa, Nigeria on oil, Zambia on copper. And this meant that when price is going down, entire nation collapse, just like that. And that was the work of British. Designed dependency and not prosperity. Another damage is political damage, okay? Britain never wanted Africa to govern itself, so they set up fragile states or fragile states with weak institutions. They drew borders that forced rival tribes into one country while splitting single nations across multiple states. And you know the results of this is wars, coups after coups, you know. So when African leaders rose who refused to bow to British influence, British intervened. They were unalived. They supported assassination, armed rebels, you know. they installed puppets governments from Congo to Nigeria to Kenya. Let me tell you, British has played a role in shaping politics that benefits themselves. We have cultural damage, social damage, spiritual damage. This is what they have caused to us. More so this spiritual damage, okay? They have convinced Africa that God loved them more than he loved us. They painted Jesus white, angels white, heaven white. They created image of divinity that excluded blackness. And yet, despite all this, Africa held on. Our ancestors whispered truth in songs, in art. They kept traditions alive in secret. And I cannot finish talking about this British and Africa without talking about diaspora, because millions of Africans were taken to the America and the Caribbean as slaves, as slaves. So their descendants, brothers and sisters, suffered under racism, segregations, and system discriminated them. Britain was a key architect of that diaspora suffering. I have a lot to say about this video. British has caused a generational effect to us, but I think I will talk some more the next episode. Okay? Now, tell me what you think on the comment section about this video. Tell me what you think, because I know you have heard a lot from this, and what I'll say finally is that we have walked through truth from the white man admitting, and Africa rise cannot be stopped. Our youth, our resources, our unity, our culture, our spirit is the future. And Britain knows it. The world knows it. That is why they are confessing. But let me tell you this. Let us not be satisfied with apologies. Let's demand justice. Let's demand reparation and build Africa on our own terms. Let's unite across the continent, and this will be great to us. Until next episode, peace out.